In the heart of darkness, when people go to sleep and you think that night has brought reassurance and tranquility, there was a man moving in nightmarish silence, watching the windows, sneaking between the alleys, and choosing his next victim with terrifying coldness. He wasn't just a killer, he was a living embodiment of horror. No law deters him, no light stops him. In the 1980s, Los Angeles had a nightmare, a faceless, patternless serial killer who killed mercilessly, leaving behind one message: the devil is here. Who is this devil who terrified millions of Americans? How did the Mexican immigrant's son become a child haunted by nightmares, turning into a ruthless night hunter? What made the police stand helpless in the face of his crimes for so many months? In this story, we tell you the true story of Richard Ramirez, one of the most horrific serial killers in American history. His full name is Ricardo Muniz Ramirez. Richard was born in February 1960 and died on June 7, 2013. He was known at the time as the Night Tracker because of his practice of killing people at night. Ramirez was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. He was the youngest of 5 children. As a child, Ramirez was constantly subjected to violence and torture by his father, which resulted in serious head injuries. He tried to escape his father's violence by sleeping in a local cemetery. When he was 12 years old, he was very influenced by his relative Miguel Ramirez, who worked in the army. Miguel showed off to Richard pictures of his victims during the Vietnam War, including pictures of Vietnamese women whom he raped, and Richard Ramirez was also present when Miguel shot his wife, Jessie, directly in the face after a dispute between them. Richard began using drugs and worshiping demons, and his interest in sexual violence became clear. When he was still in high school, Richard worked in a hotel and was stealing from guests, but he was fired after one of the guests entered his room and found that Richard had broken into it and was trying to rape his wife. Richard Ramirez dropped out of high school, and when he was 22, he moved to California permanently. Richard Ramirez committed the murder of 13 people in the 1980s in California, which is why he was called the Night Tracker, because he infiltrated more than one house to commit his crimes, and the method of killing was either by shooting the targeted person, by strangling him, or by separating the head from the body, in addition to raping women. And the residents of California saw a satanic sign drawn on the walls of the victims' homes, which caused terror and panic among the residents of the state. And during his criminal life, Ramirez succeeded in killing 13 people between June 1984 and August 1985. On June 28, 1984, Jenny Finko, 79, was found brutally murdered in her apartment, stabbed repeatedly while sleeping in her bed, and almost beheaded as a result of strangulation. On March 17, 1985, Richard Ramirez attacked Maria Hernandez, 22, and shot her in the face, but she survived because the bullet ricocheted with the key she was holding in her hand when she raised them to her face for protection. Her friend heard the sound of gunfire and went to make sure, and when Richard saw her, he shot her once in the forehead, killing her. On March 27, 1985, Richard Ramirez entered a house he had previously broken into and killed Vincent Zazzara, 64, by shooting him in the head. His wife, Maxine, 44, woke up to the sound of gunfire and brought her husband's gun, but the gun was empty. This behavior angered Ramirez greatly, and he shot her 3 times, mutilating her body and gouging out her eyes. The bodies of Vincent and Maxine were discovered by their son, Peter. Through the similarity of the bullets in this crime to the previous one, the police learned of the existence of a serial killer. On May 14, 1985, Richard Ramirez returned to Monterey Park in search of another random victim and entered the home of Bill Doe, 66, and his wife Lillian, 56, who had special needs. Richard shot Bill Doe, then entered his wife Lillian's room, handcuffed her, and raped her after stealing valuables from the house. On the night of May 29, 1985, Richard Ramirez stole a Mercedes-Benz and drove it to Monrovia. He stopped at the home of his new victim, Belle, 83, and her sister, Florence Nettie Lang, 81. He took an iron hammer, beat Lang in her bedroom, raped her, beat Bill, electrocuted her with an electric wire, took lipstick, and painted a 5-pointed star on her thigh and on a wall. They were discovered 2 days later alive, but Belle died from her injuries. The next day, Richard was driving the same car to Burbank and sneaked into Carol Kyle's 42-year-old home at gunpoint, handcuffing Carol and her 11-year-old son, looting the house, and then raping Carol. On the night of July 2, 1985, Richard Ramirez drove a stolen Toyota to Arcady. He randomly selected Marie Louise Cannon's 75th home. After quietly entering her home, he found her sleeping in her bedroom. He beat her with a flashlight until she lost consciousness, then stabbed her repeatedly with a butcher's knife from her kitchen. On July 5, 1985, Richard Ramirez broke into a house in the Sierra Madre and beat Whitney Bennett, 16, with an iron bat while she was sleeping on her bed and tried to strangle her with a telephone cord. Bennett survived the brutal beating and needed 478 stitches to close her head wounds. On July 7th, Richard Ramirez broke into the home of Joyce Lucille Nelson, 61, again in Monterey Park. He found her sleeping on a sofa in the living room. He beat and kicked her until she died. Then he also broke into Sophie Dickman's house, handcuffed her, attempted to rape her, and then stole her jewelry and valuables. On July 20, 1985, Richard Ramirez bought a machete before driving the stolen Toyota and broke into the home of Leila Kinding, 66, and her husband, Maxon, 68. He beat them with a machete and then shot them dead. He mutilated the bodies, then stole valuables and left the house. Richard Ramirez was driving in Sun Valley. At approximately 4:15 a.m., he broke into the Covenant family home, shot Chiwang in Covenant in the head while he was sleeping, killing him instantly, then assaulted his wife, Samked, by beating and raping her repeatedly, tied up their 11-year-old son, then stole valuables and left the house. On August 6, 1985, Ramirez led toward Northridge and broke into Chris and Virginia Peterson's home. He shot Virginia and then Peterson and tried to escape, but Peterson fought with him and avoided being hit by 2 bullets, so Richard fled the house. And fortunately, the couple survived their injuries. On August 8, 1985, at approximately 2:30 a.m., Richard Ramirez drove a stolen car to Diamond Bar and chose the home of Sakina Abueth, 27, and her husband, Elias Abueth, 68. He broke into the house, went to the bedroom, and shot Elias in the head, killing him instantly. Then he handcuffed Sakina, beat her, and brutally raped her, forcing her to tell him where the jewelry was in the house. Meanwhile, their 3-year-old child entered the room. He handcuffed him and continued raping his mother in front of him. After Richard left the house, Sakina untied her son and sent him to the neighbor's house to ask for help.
Due to media coverage of his crimes, Richard Ramirez left Los Angeles and headed to San Francisco Bay to complete his series of crimes. On August 18, 1985, Richard Ramirez entered the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. He shot Peter, 66, and was killed in his sleep. Barbara, 62, was beaten, raped, shot in the head, and died instantly. At the crime scene, Richard used lipstick to paint a 5-pointed star and the phrase "Knife Jack" on the bedroom wall. On August 24, 1985, in a stolen orange Toyota, Ramirez traveled 76 miles to South Los Angeles. Through the back door, he broke into the house of Bill Carnes, 30, and his fiancée, Inez Erickson, 29. Richard Ramirez entered the bedroom and shot Bill 3 times in the head. Then he told Inez that he was the night tracker, punched her, tied her up with a tie, dragged her to another room, and raped her. Then he asked her to tell him where the jewelry and valuables were. Then he said to her, "Tell them the night tracker was here." During his exit, their neighbor, James Romeo, 30 years old, suspected Richard and wrote down what he could see from the car plate. Inez gathered her strength and went to the neighbor's house to ask for help for her fiancé, and the surgeons were able to remove 2 bullets from his head, and he survived his injury. When news of the break-in spread, Romeo told his parents about the suspicious man driving an orange Toyota, and they notified the police and provided them with the license plate number. The police were able to find the stolen car, and although Richard was keen to scan all the fingerprints, they were able to find a fingerprint on the car's mirror. Inez also gave the investigators a description of his appearance. The fingerprint was found to be that of Richard Munoz Ramirez, 25, from Texas, with a long criminal record that included traffic arrests and drug possession. Officials decided to publish a photo of Richard Ramirez taken from an arrest for car theft in December 1984, and the identity of the night tracker was finally identified. From a police press conference in which it was said, "We know who you are, and soon everyone will know too, and you will have nowhere to hide."
He was arrested. A group of residents in eastern Los Angeles succeeded in arresting Richard Ramirez and took him to the police station, because the newspaper published a photo of the killer Richard Ramirez. The court pronounced the death sentence against Richard Ramirez on charges of killing 13 people during the 1980s in 1989, but the execution department delayed the execution. Richard Ramirez died at the age of 53 at Marine General Hospital from lymphoma. He was sentenced to death and waited 23 years for the sentence to be carried out. And so, the curtain fell on one of the darkest pages in the history of American crime. Richard Ramirez was imprisoned, but he stuck to his obsession, smiling at the cameras and talking about the devil as if he were his closest friend. He showed no remorse. He did not ask for forgiveness, as if evil had materialized in him, inhabiting his body until his last breath. In 2013, Ramirez left the world behind bars, not by the bullets of justice, but by a malignant disease that ended his life silently, as if justice had come, but in its own way. But the question that remained unanswered: is evil born with man, or is it created by a broken childhood and a deviant environment? Was Ramirez a demon from the start, or a victim turned executioner? What we know for sure is that his memory will remain engraved in America's memory not as history, but as a warning. A warning that evil may wear a human face and live among us, smiling, silent, waiting for the night.